User Dapper Lightning 98 asks, doesn't it feel rude to cast spells like Hold Person, Banishment, and Calm Emotions to deal with in-party quarrels? I did it once. Our party had a chaotic evil barbarian, an evil drow rogue, a paladin, a cleric of Tyr, me, and a wizard. We've accepted a guest to help some people overthrow an oppressive ruler. On the road, we met some people. Paladin tried to talk to them, but Barbarian was like, screw it, I don't want that talky stuff. I wanna kill people. Seriously, that was literally his motivation, and attacked them for no reason other than being a chaotic evil barbarian. I tried casting command on him to make him stop, and of course, the chaotic barbarian instantly became hostile to me. We reduced him to 0 hit points, but then the drow, I don't remember the details, but he started describing himself doing some gross things with the dead NPC's bodies. And now the wizard was like, screw this, these people are nuts, I'm leaving. It was literally the second scene, and the party broke up. The DM had to restart the game with different characters and some different players. I get the strangest feeling that the paladin using the command spell wasn't the horror story in this one. Just a small feeling. Oh, you know, no particular reason why. My name is Jacob Crow, and welcome to the Crow's Perch. From atop my perch, we dive into tales of tabletop gaming adventure gone terribly, terribly wrong, so that you, my dear viewer, can avoid such travesties in your own games. That or to give you inspiration to teach your players a lesson about who's in charge. Either way. But before we get started with today's stories, a special thank you to this week's sponsor, Apotheosis. Is this you, an average, boring fighter that can't even disarm an opponent without becoming a battle master? Oh. What if you could free yourself from the restraints of a class system and build your character any way you wanted? I can do that? Yes, you can. Welcome to Apotheosis. In Apotheosis, you are free to make the character of your dreams in a classless game, where combat stays deadly, and characters can be whatever you want them to be. Grow your skills by performing actions in-game, instead of praying your DM lets you level after killing that dragon, allowing you to learn new powers and abilities by playing how you want. But that's not all. Apotheosis is getting its first official expansion. Group together with your friends with new optional rules, including new rules to cast collaborative rituals. Tired of coming up with a long-winded explanation on how you can't just counterspell the ritual that the cultists use to summon Tiamat? Well, now you can have a list of everything the cult needs to succeed in their goal, giving them clear objectives that players can follow, and if they're feeling extra chaotic, maybe they can finish the ritual themselves. So what are you waiting for? Apotheosis is available now on DriveThruRPG and Amazon, with a free demo version of the game that has everything you need to start playing. But wait, you might say, Crow, are you in the game? To which I'd say, how many times do I have to tell you this, Jimmy? Do I have to send you to Florida again? And yes, if you send a message to any of Apotheosis' socials, including their Twitter or Facebook page, you can ask for an exclusive stat block for a crow-themed NPC for your games, which you're then obligated to let me know if he TPKs your party. Thank you to Apotheosis for sponsoring this video. And now, back to the stories. In our first story by user Successful Dust, we find out what happens when a D&D Karen takes over a game. And so, without further ado, let's hop into our local retail stores and let the manager know you're here, as we gather up a murder and dive right into this story. Throwaway, because I have no idea if the people who I played with use Reddit. But since finding this subreddit, I crave the catharsis of posting in it. I'll try and keep it brief. I joined a game after years of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition inactivity. I joined a pre-established game with a group of people I was decently friendly with. There are several dungeon masters in the Discord server, and one of them liked how I played enough to invite me to one of their games as well. The problem lies a player who I'll be calling Sophie. Without being too specific, I was in my early 20s during the time of this, and Sophie was almost 20 years older than me. Big age gap. But whatever. she seemed nice enough. The problem is when this woman twice my age starts to become a bully. The DM's baby and spoil her to hell and back. Whatever she wants, she got. There was once an entire hour of gameplay where her player character got fitted for pretty new armor, and we all had to sit there and watch. It wasn't unusual for several hours of gameplay to be dedicated to just her and what she was doing. There was one game where a solid 2 hours was just dedicated to her and her character. I was so ecstatic to have a Dungeons & Dragons game. I blew it off and endured it, even if it happened in 2 different games, until she decided to bully me. My player character ended up getting along with an NPC her player character liked, and I thought it was harmless fun. The Dungeon Master did too, but Sophie took this as permission to bully me. She would start to drop passive-aggressive comments, would cut me off in conversation, in and out of game. This would escalate into her character bleeding into the second game we played together, where she yelled at my PC. When called out on it, she used a family member passing away as an excuse to bully me. I got concerned and talked to the Dungeon Masters. They agreed this was a problem, and tried to get us to work out our differences. Except her behavior didn't change, and when I was firm and cold with her in my frustrations, she cried to the DMs. I didn't insult or berate her. I just spoke very carefully the facts of the situation and what upset me, and reassured her time and time again that I didn't hate her and wanted to be friends, but I didn't like how she was treating me. Everyone used baby gloves with her, despite her being almost 40, because she was one of those people who talks in baby voices and does the ooh nuzzles you thing. I tried to use similar baby gloves with her to be mindful of how everyone else treated her, even if I was frustrated. But she went to the DMs and said she felt like she was being prosecuted for a crime. The DMs had to explain to her that my logical and impartial communication style, I hate being misinterpreted, so I tend to choose my words carefully. But eventually, when the DMs realized she was enough of a handful that dropping her out of the game might have been a thing. But despite reassuring me in private that they'd be willing to for my own comfort, they went back on it. The DMs really valued Sophie, so they tried to force a Discord call with themselves present to intervene in the situation and to get us to be friends again. I'll admit, I snapped a little bit because I was frustrated. I was being treated as equally in the wrong for giving it to her straight in my concerns, despite me reassuring her that I still wanted to be friends and didn't hold it against her, and was trying to reassure her throughout all of it. Sophie had gone to the DMs and lied about everything I said, and I caught her in more lies in screenshots they shared with me and compared it to my own screenshots of messages with her, where there was visibly no malice or ire there, and I was clearly trying to be nice and bond despite everything. When caught in her lies, I was frustrated on this forced get-along shift of a call, and expressed that frustration. I didn't insult anyone, but I do admit, this is where I messed up, as I expressed frustration at the lies and the babying of her, and how it wasn't fair how someone twice my age was allowed to bully me, and get held with minimal accountability, and I left in a huff. Fast forward. One of the DMs sends an essay about how I'm a terrible, awful person who tried to make them choose between their friends, and basically dedicated several paragraphs to trying to gaslight me about how this entire thing was my fault and how I'm not a good person. Another party member agreed I should have spoken up sooner about her treatment, but I tried to explain how I hadn't spoken up because I knew she'd been going through a rough time. But this treatment went on for months, so naturally I got tired. I'll be honest, the worst of it was that the gaslighting worked. I started to legitimately believe I was the problem for not letting her take things out on me, and that the DMs had been right to go back on their word. Because she was an inherently more valuable player than I was. The truth is, Sophie was their favorite, and Sophie knew it, and took advantage of it to get rid of a player she was insecure about, since I was better at art than her. The whole thing is a petty mess. It felt like she was transporting me back to high school. I hadn't realized how bad this game was until I left it, and shared my experiences with other D&D players who showed genuine horror at what I'd been through. Like I said, the gaslighting had worked, and I legitimately believed I was an awful person, and remember trying to beg the old DM for a forgiveness that I had not gotten. In both games Sophie and I were in, her character got hours of screen time, where I'd be lucky to play for an hour, with sessions averaging from 5 to 6 hours. The DMs promised to fix this, but they never did. The worst of it was a 6-hour battle training session, where my character fainted early on, so I wasn't allowed to play for the rest of the night. I played for 20 minutes, of the beginning of the session, mind you, out of 6 hours. And this was a common occurrence, whereas Sophie was given all the screen time her little heart desired, even at the expense of the rest of the party. The DMs also made every mistake of DMing you could make that I didn't realize until I'd left, and played actual good D&D games. There's obviously the choosing player favorites, but they'd also have a million NPCs and a million side quests, and the party was constantly split up, so that they could have their own little arcs and things with no sense of team unity or uniform goal whatsoever. Almost all of the sessions I was in, the party was separated to do their own shopping and have their own interactions, with barely any combat or any teamwork. You'd basically get the game started and have to wait your turn for your little vignette, with no team bonding or team goal or team quest or anything. And when you started one side quest, 4 more side quests would pop up, and no storyline ever got resolved. So it'd be like, we need to investigate this warehouse. Oh, but this tiefling looks suspicious, so we need to stop what we're doing and investigate her, but oh, this fountain is glowing with weird magic. Guess that's our priority now. Because that's how the DM would do their plot hooks. I remember the DM telling me proudly that the story would go on for 10 years by their calculations, and I firmly believe that's because they never streamlined anything and didn't know how to be concise. Well, this is longer than I expected. So, I'm a hypocrite on that concise part, but I'd like to thank this subreddit for giving me a space to get this awful experience off my chest. I'm in much better games now, where I actually get to play and bond with really awesome people. Well, user Successful Dust, I'm glad you were able to make it out of that game. Sophie seemed to have an iron grip over the entire campaign. What between taking over scenes and hogging the spotlight, as well as her cry-bullying to the DMs when she didn't have her way. Sophie sounds exhausting, and it's a wonder any of the other players stuck around, knowing they were trapped in a game where they were spectators instead of players. Yet another reminder of something I've mentioned on this channel before, to stand up for yourself if you feel like you're being bullied in your game. And if you bring it up to your DM and they continue to do nothing, then the only remaining choice is to drop the game. It's rough. Even in games like this, you have a lot of fond memories of even the smallest moments in your games. But you can do it. Your time is worth more than that, and it can be better spent in a table that actually appreciates you. I think that's it for this story. In our next story by Lily, Wynaunt of Demons, we are told a tale of a realism campaign that goes horribly wrong. It's always the realism campaigns, I swear. Just a general tip to avoid an RPG horror story. Always have one foot out the door when someone says it's a gritty realism campaign. And to anyone new to the channel who doesn't know what I'm talking about, well, you're gonna find out. So, without further ado, let's make our next campaign setting a direct plagiarism of Game of Thrones, as we gather up a murder, and maybe a lawyer, and dive right into this story. So, first some quick context. There were 4 of us, including the DM. We were playing in a play-by-post, gritty realism game. I was playing a cleric, my friend was playing a rogue, and the other player was a barbarian. This next bit is super important. Both the barb and I were playing humans, variant human. My idea was to be a combat medic, so I was playing a war cleric with the healer feat. The barb was, well, a barbarian, so he took Great Weapon Master. Again, for emphasis, I was effectively a field doctor, and the barbarian was a tank with a great axe that could occasionally split people in two. Oh, and we're all level 3. So, the true beginning of the issue starts a little ways before it. We're traveling together when we find a giant village. They let us in, and I offer my services as a healer to make some money on the side, and the barbarian opts to come along. Miraculously, this thriving giant village doesn't have a doctor, so they have quite a few people hurt, sick, and or dying. But at the same time, some of these medical procedures require more than one set of hands, so I enlist the barbarian as my nurse/assistant. So I do some medicine checks, and heal some giants. Then, a serious issue comes up. My check reveals that the giant's lung had been perforated and is filling up with blood and fluid from his body cavity. Now, I don't have the equipment to deal with this kind of injury, but I do know a slipshod treatment that will suffice until they can get him to a bigger town. Now, you might be asking, Lilith, why aren't you using magic to heal these giants? And I'll tell you, my lovelies. See, the reason was twofold. The first fold was that since this was gritty realism, a short rest was 8 hours, and a long rest was a week. So, being a 3rd level cleric, I did not have the spell slots to be healing willy-nilly, hence the healer feat. The second fold was that the DM, in the spirit of gritty realism, said that low magic like Cure Wounds and Healing Word were more akin to stitches and patching up. They could heal shallow wounds, to the point of no longer needing to worry about infection, but they could not heal grievous injury. Remember that. So, the holdover treatment for this giant's injury is basically making a puncture wound all the way through his skin and lung, then putting a tube into the lung to drain the liquid, and hope that his lung didn't collapse while they moved him to a big city healer. A procedure that needs multiple hands, so I'd figured I'd do the most important part, and be the one that shoved the tubes inside the wound, and the barbarian would be the one to make the incision. The DM made a barbarian roll a medicine check. Pretty normal. He rolls a 2. A 2. Not a 1. A 2. So, logically, the DM has the barbarian stab the giant to death in front of all of the other giants. So now, we're arrested. All our stuff is taken and on trial for murder, but it isn't so much a trial as it is the giants being like, "You killed a guy, now we're gonna kill you." Luckily, our rogue is able to just barely convince them to simply kick us out of the village with a nat 20. That's not an exaggeration, by the way. So they kick us out of the village, with literally only the clothes on our backs. We're stuck in the middle of the woods with almost no equipment, and we need to survive. And, oh yeah, it's the dead of winter, so we do our best camping. But despite average rolls, the DM isn't really giving much. Then one day, we stumble across what the DM says is obviously a bandit hideout. So we all collectively think, awesome, we can check to see how many people are there and maybe get some equipment. So we manage to sneak up to the hideout, and it appears that there are only a few bandits. Now, while camping, between the 3 of us, we were able to forage the necessary pieces to craft a crude stone dagger and a crude stone hand axe. Basically, they just had a -1 to damage, and the possibility to break on a nat 1. The barbarian just found a large branch to serve as a great club. So we think if we go about it in a smart manner, we might be able to get some decent equipment, and maybe even whatever loot the bandits might have. So we attack the place. It's close, but we're able to take down some of them, and pick up their weapons. Then it happened. The barbarian rolls a nat 1. Now, when we joined, we all agreed to a critical fumble table, which is why we were so shocked at the consequences of the nat 2. But also why we didn't react the way we ought to have. So the barbarian rolled a nat 1. What could happen? He breaks his weapon, he drops it, he hits one of us, he hits himself? No. The bandit he's fighting gets a free hit on him, and cripples one of the barbarian's hands. Until we can have it healed. He has a permanent disadvantage while using weapons with the two-handed property. And enemies have advantage on disarming him from things held in that hand. And he has a permanent disadvantage on athletics checks related to doing things with 2 hands. So the barbarian, with the Great Weapon Master feat, now can't use great weapons. I tried to heal his hand, but the DM said that we would not be able to heal this kind of wound at our current level, and we'd have to go find a larger city and pay a cleric to heal the hand. How much? Probably about 500 gold pieces. So we'd lost almost all our gear, were stranded in the woods, had no money, and now we'd have to find a large city to pay a cleric with money we didn't have. The barbarian quit on the spot. The DM was pissed off, raving that he had no clue why the barbarian quit, and that he knew it was a gritty realism game. When the rogue and I explained that maybe he quit because it seemed like we only ever got punished for interacting with the world, and that he had basically crippled the barbarian's character since we had no money to buy a heal, no equipment to make money, and no people to take jobs from, maybe the barbarian just decided to call it quits. So, the DM nuked the whole server. As an afternote, this wasn't the only instance of something like this happening, just the most egregious. As with many DMs, it really seemed like the DM equated gritty realism with everyone is an asshole and only bad things happen. Low rolls were punished overly harshly, while high rolls were diminished. Nat 20s didn't do much, usually only letting us partially succeed. But if you rolled a 5 and below, it was treated as a critical failure, and extremely bad things happened. TLDR. DM thinks gritty realism means everything sucks, cripples player character, gets confused when they quit, then nukes server when remaining players explain everything sucking isn't very fun. Ah, the tale of the gritty realism campaign comes full circle. Look, there are ways to do this correctly, please. Having more dire consequences that can't be immediately solved can make the game more interesting. But you also have to make their successes mean something and give them tangible things to be able to work towards. Otherwise, you end up with a game so punishing that the players are just waiting until they finally die, just to end the suffering for but a moment. Anyway, I'm ranting, so let's just end today's stories. If you like today's stories and you'd like to see more of them, then please consider subscribing to the channel. We recently hit 10k subscribers and I'm really happy about it. But we can't end the video without first announcing this week's winner of Art of the Week. Art of the Week! This week's Art of the Week, by user Agent Myers, depicts the crow in the gallant regality befitting his station as the king of the Corvid court, as he assumes the mantle of DM, telling of the perilous tale of the heroes trapped within his dungeon. Thank you, Agent Myers, for your submission, and I pray the heroes can escape from the clutches of the Corvid king. Want your own art to appear on this week's Art of the Week? Simply send it to me on my business email, my Discord, or hit me up on Twitter. And of course, I would like to thank the Crow's Perch patrons, like Damian Gerard, Novatonix, Shepdog, and Reuven Gritters. But they got nothing in our accounts of quills, man. Like Critical Kunic, Evix, King Trazil, Christian Pip, bro, Cosmosis, Kooky Spooks, Rikus, Vincent, Haley Thompson, Zero Fang, and Netscape Navigator, bro. I would like to announce the Barons of Beaks, like Kuntos Weasel, MoetisMaou, Chunky Salsa, Tech Blog, Kurestor, Carter-Spawn, AModestPastry, Jester King, Gintahl, Misfit, Gibber-Woods, Wormy, MulQueeny, Den of the Drake, McYeetly, and Anja. I's not got more docker than a Duke of Feathers, alright, boys. Like Jared Saw, Booze Otters, Jared Zemlin, Staniel Das Boot, Henna, General Constantine Chase, HappyRex, Doc Salty 96, and Acroth. Thank you so much for your support, without which this wouldn't be possible, honestly. You too can become a patron on the Crow's Perch Patreon by donating as little as $1 a month, every penny of which goes to my Uber Eats fund, so I no longer have to eat out of people's trash cans. It's rather unbecoming of the king of the Burb aristocracy. And with all of that out of the way, I will see you next time. As the crow flies.